Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss a topic of great prominence in foreign trade. So, your favorite channel Autodidact presents the topic protectionism. Before we move on to the discussion, it is worth announcing that I'll be using two terms: domestic country and foreign country. Domestic country, the country which is importing and will adopt protectionism. Foreign country, any country outside the domestic country. This country will export the goods to the domestic country, means our country. Moving ahead, first let's have a look at one problem being conversed between Mr. Thomas, who is an economist, and a few people who have come from underdeveloped countries, Ghana and Zimbabwe. Hello, Mr. Thomas, you're such a great economist. We've a concern. We belong to an underdeveloped country. Though, we've a lot of natural resources in our country, but still we don't find scope to utilize them and grow ourselves. Please suggest something. What can we do? Considering the problem of these people, Mr. Thomas will look into the core problems. This is required to understand the situation so as to frame the economic policy and practice thereby. Now, if we talk about the options available at our disposal, either we can go for trade liberalization or the trade protectionism, which can be seen as the controlled imports. Trade liberalization is the situation when countries remove or reduce restrictions from free flow of goods between the nations. It is good for the countries as they share manufactured goods, advanced technology and capital with each other. This enables them to have a variety of options, lower prices and hence standard of living. But if we do so for the underdeveloped nations, we are not going to gain in terms of balance of trade, as the value of the exports is not going to be at par with the valued imports or processed goods. The reason is we will be exporting raw material which is lower in value, however the imported goods will be the finished goods which will be higher in value comparatively. Nevertheless, controlled imports or using protectionism is the situation which is absolutely adverse to the former. In our situation, first and foremost thing that we have to keep in mind is that we need to protect the domestic industries. If we allow free trade in a situation when we cannot gain many dollars through, effectively, the net balance of trade is going to be unfavorable. At the same time, protection of domestic employment is also to be kept in mind, because with the penetrating multinational corporations, few of the jobs may be eliminated by completing the process in the foreign country. These MNCs can bring parts ready, which only needs to be assembled in the domestic country. Thirdly, adoption of lot of multinational goods may erode down the culture over a period of time. We can take the example of the cinema industry. We can see that over the past few decades a lot of turnarounds have taken place. Same is the case with the fashion and apparel industry. The impact of Western culture cannot be overlooked over the Indian tradition. Next, while taking strategic decisions into consideration, the protection of the infant industry is very much required, as they are producing the goods in very low quantity. Because of this, they usually incur higher cost of production. If we allow the multinational companies to come into the trade practices in our country, then these multinational companies will become a threat to these small industries who just have started, or we can say that they are in a very premature phase of facing competition. The cost of production will be very high in comparison to the other company which has been manufacturing the goods for a long time and has achieved economies of scale. It is also possible that the foreign company may use dumping to evade the competition in the target country. So in all probability, the destination country or the domestic country is going to lose more than it gains from the cross-border trades. Besides this, there are a few industries that are to be kept under the country's withholding for the security reasons, like the shipping and armations are usually kept under the state control. Otherwise, the countries can have serious consequences. We can see that most of the countries either manufacture these things their own or attempt to make their own. One more condition that may arise is, when the rival nation has created hurdles for our exports in their economy as a protectionism measure. We have to do the same for their import in our country to retaliate against it. Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act is a very good example of retaliation. We'll be understanding this act later here. Even America and China did it initially. It was Mr. Trump who announced tariffs against Chinese imports for steel and aluminium, reacting to which China also announced high tariff rates for American imports. In a situation when wealthy multinational companies are selling at the lower prices in our country than the prices in their own country for the motive of evading competition, it is called dumping. We need to make their goods expensive in our economy so as to protect our domestic industries. Moving forward, so for this many reasons we adopt certain economic policies that refrains the flow of goods and services between different countries. The prime objective of such policy formation is to reduce the amount of imports in the country. For that purpose we have a couple of instruments available. First of them is tariff. This is basically nothing but imposing some monetary tax or duty on the goods being imported in the domestic country. For example, if we are bringing something in $200 and applied tax is $10, the final price will become $210. This way we have increased the price, and because of this increase in price, the demand will shrink in the domestic market. So we can consider this as a measure to make the foreign goods less competitive in the domestic market. Next instrument that we use is non-tariff barriers. This can be understood as non-monetary obstacles to reduce the amount of imports in the domestic country. Another form of economic policy aimed at restraining imports through administrative controls, which includes setting high standards for the quality of imported goods, introducing various terms and clauses which will make the other country difficult to manufacture and thus export in the domestic country. There are several kinds of tariff barriers, and the foremost is specific tariff. This is the fixed amount which is levied on a type of commodity being imported. The duty charged will be independent of the value of the good. We can understand this with an example of wristwatches being imported in the United States. The defined tariff rate is 51 cents for a unit of imported wristwatch. Now, this wristwatch can be a $40 Swatch or $5,000 Rolex. The amount of duty levied will be the same for both, that is 51 cents. Thus, in this case, if 1,000 watches are imported, the government will be receive $510 as import duty. Though, this duty varies for different goods and different countries. Like if we import a pair of shoes, $15 will be paid, while for importing a personal computer, $300 will be paid as import duty. This is irrespective of the number of units being imported from the foreign country. At the same time, it is to be kept in mind that these $15 and $300 will be charged if the goods are being imported from China. In case the goods will be imported from Korea or Japan, the rate is going to be different. Moving ahead, the next type of tariff barrier is ad valorem, which is a Latin word and means according to value. In this case, the duty will be charged in accordance with the value of the commodity being imported. So in case the imported commodity is expensive, the importer will be paying higher duty than the things which are cheaper, which will attract lesser duty. We can take the example of cell phones in India. The applied duty is 18.6%. So, if you are importing an iPhone of price 1,060,000, the applied duty will be Rs. 19,716. However, if we will import an iPhone of price Rs.9000, the applicable duty will be Rs. 1674. Similarly, for a Samsung phone of Rs.15000, the applicable duty will be Rs. 2,790. This is how the amount of duty will be changed depending upon the value of the commodity, although the type of commodity is the same, which is cell phone in our case. Moving ahead, next instrument is license. So a license is granted to a business by the government, allowing the business to import certain types of goods into the country. This will limit the number of importers in the country and indirectly the amount of commodities in turn. in case the government wants to control the imports later on. It will be easier and less time-taking for the government as the number of importers are lesser and are always identified. The example can be a restriction on the import of cheese for which the government will be giving licenses to a few companies which will act as importers. This creates a restriction on competition and increases the price for customers. Moving ahead, the import quota is a physical cap on the amount of a commodity which can be imported from the foreign country. This cap can be on the quantity as well as on the value of the commodity. In an instance where the government will set the maximum level of quantity that can be imported as 100 tons. As soon as the amount of import reaches the threshold level, it cannot be imported furthermore. This can be an effective way of restraining imports when the government wants immediate action. A very recent instance can be taken into consideration. Very recently, Indian government has put a quota over the export of fabric which is used for making surgical masks. This is because the government wants this fabric for making masks which can be used for domestic consumption in the corona threat phase. Moving ahead, unlike other measures of controlling imports, this measure is taken by the exporting country. The export will be restrained from the foreign country side, although it is usually reciprocated by the export withdrawal from the other country. We can understand this with an example of trade practices between Brazil and Canada, which exports sugar and coal respectively. Means Brazil exports sugar to Canada and Canada exports coal to Brazil. Under this Brazil will decide to stop exporting sugar to Canada. At the same time, Canada will decide not to export coal to Brazil. Moving ahead, we have so far understood the applications of various tariff barriers on various types of commodities being imported from the foreign country in the domestic country. Furthermore, we will be understanding the effect of applying these tariff barriers in the country. Let's move ahead. First, let us have a look at the graph without applying the tariff barriers. Here in this graph, the blue line shows the supply curve and the red line depicts the demand curve. The intersection point is market equilibrium. This is the point where the price should be set ideally and quantity will be met at optimum. You can see that at the present production level, quantity supplied is lesser than the quantity demanded. Means there is a shortage of the product in the market. And the upper gap shows the scope for imports. If we will not be applying tariffs, this market will be captured by the foreign companies, making it difficult for the domestic companies to become efficient and compete. Moving ahead, here when we have applied tariffs, the price is going to be increased from P star to P. Because of the imports, the supply will be increased, thus moving from left to right will reduce the amount of shortage in the market. At the same time, more consumers will start consuming the product, which will result in an increase in demand of the product. Resultantly, because of the increased demand, the price of the commodity will also increase. Moving ahead, I believe we have got sufficient understanding about imposing tariffs and their impact. Now let us move forward to gain the understanding about non-tariff barriers. Non-tariff barriers, which are of non-monetary forms of creating hurdles for foreign trade. They can be best showcased with an example of the Smoot-Hawley Act, which was named after the sponsors of this act. The Senate Reed Smoot of Utah was the chairman, and Senate Willis Hawley of Oregon was the representative. Initially, an import duty tax of 40% was applied, for which Europe wanted to retaliate. This tariff was prompted as retaliation from Europe governments. This was the phase after First World War, when European farmers were recovering from the threatening phase of the war. On the other hand, America was having overproduction. This overproduction enabled America to reduce the prices. This situation could actually lead to deepening the situation when America was having high production and could sell at the lower price, and foreign countries to utilize their overproduction. The Republican candidate who promised to impose the tariff failed to enact it in the first attempt because of the strong opposition in the parliament. However, after the stock market crash in 1929, this protection gained strength and was passed by a margin of 2 points. There were 44 points in favor and 42 against in the Senate. Bill was finally enacted after signing on the 17th of June 1930. Second way of non-tariff barrier is providing subsidies by the government. The government provides money to the domestic producers so as to reduce their net cost of production. For example, if a company is incurring Rs.10 to make a unit of a commodity, if 3 rupees are being paid by the government, the effective cost for the producer will become Rs.7. Therefore, if he exports and sells even at Rs.8, he is gaining profit margin of rupee 1. As are the physical limitations on the amount of commodity that can be imported from a foreign country. As discussed previously, it leads to immediate and effective control over the amount of imports in the domestic territory. Next very important variant of the non-tariff barrier can be devaluing the own currency. The very recent example is China. In the American-China trade war, China bought a lot of dollars from the market, which created the shortage of dollars in the market. Because of this shortage, the dollar price increased. We can see the dollar rates being floated between 70 to 75 for the past several years. In comparison to the dollar, the Chinese currency is very cheap. Thus, it is profitable for every country to buy in Chinese currency rather than in dollars. Means countries will prefer buying from China rather than America. This is how devaluing their own currency actually benefits by favoring the balance of trade. In the next video, I'll be talking about the America-China trade war by imposing taxes on other sides, by which they have created a rift situation in the world economic sentiments. We will understand that without announcing war, how the two countries are fighting against each other. Next measure can be a situation when countries raise the standards benchmark for the imported commodities in the country. The USA has imposed very high standards in terms of side effects and compare chemical compositions in the medicines being imported in the country, because of which many of the countries do fail to match the standards and thus to export in the USA. In fact, it is difficult to prove that these NTB, the non-tariff barriers, are prohibitive or intentional. Now, I believe, most of the terms about the tariff and non-tariff barriers have been covered. If you want anything else to be included, please mention it in the comment section. I will certainly include it in the next video. Before we move on to the discussion, it is worth announcing that I'll be using two terms: domestic country and foreign country. Domestic For any feedback and topic inclusion, please write in the comment section. Please like and share the video to learn more topics. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel Autodidact to stay updated.